Good afternoon. You are listening to Transformation Highway. Thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. I've got live in the studio with me, Jackie Powell. Jackie Sue Powell is a certified yoga instructor based in Santa Cruz, California. She began practicing yoga in 2010 in Guatemala. Jackie's goal is to take yoga outside the yoga studio and make it accessible to everyone. She thrives teaching yoga in diverse settings such as health and community centers, schools, offices, and stores. She's taught free yoga around the world, including France, Spain, Switzerland, and Palestine, and has loved every moment of that. She currently teaches adult vinyasa, yoga for kids, and chair yoga for seniors in Santa Cruz, Watsonville, and San Jose. On September 30th, Jackie will be co-leading a healthy spine workshop at Watsonville Yoga, Dance, and Healing Arts, where participants will learn best practices to prevent and treat back pain. Welcome, Jackie, to KZSE's Transformation Highway.
Thank you so much, Silvana. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So let's first talk about how you developed a yoga practice in Guatemala. Why were you there, and who were your teachers there?
Sure. So I was in Guatemala from 2010 until 2012, and I was there to build water systems in rural villages and schools. And I loved my job there. I had to travel a lot. There was also some stress from living in the country, just given the dynamic of the country and the situation it's in. So one of my best friends there took me to a yoga class in a local hotel that meets every weekend. And I really just fell in love with the practice. It helped me get through some very stressful moments in Guatemala. Back then, there wasn't that much yoga in Antigua, Guatemala, and now there's a lot more, but at the time, it was a group called Yoga Antigua, and I practiced with a teacher named Ray Ishi, and it was a really great introduction to yoga. Moreover, after that, because there is not a lot of yoga, like here you can practice yoga at almost any hour of the day in Santa Cruz, and there it's offered less frequently. So I also started practicing with yoga videos with some more well-known and famous teachers like Baron Baptiste and Rodney Yee, but it was through their DVDs, and I just practiced their one sequence over and over again. So I feel like I had a little bit of practice from actual teachers in a space, but then also a lot of it was self-taught through these videos.
So was it you were kind of hooked after the first time, or did you have to sort of stick with it before you started seeing its appeal?
It pretty much caught me the first time. But to kind of go back a little further than that, the first yoga class I ever took was several years before that, probably about 5 years before that, in Costa Rica. I didn't know what I was getting into. My surf instructor in Costa Rica took me to a yoga class. It was outside. It was super humid. And I intended to participate, but after the first probably 5 minutes, I realized I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I watched them the whole time, and in my opinion, at that moment in my life, I was watching people do acrobatics. And so I feel like some people have that same experience. They might not go to the right class the first time and write off yoga. So I think that was my first experience. I saw it. I was like, wow, this is not for me. But then I had a friend take me to a class that was more suited for my level and my ability.
So you've just hinted at the different types of yoga classes, and that perhaps people might have gone to the wrong one the first time. So I think maybe that's a good message to send out to potential practitioners, is to maybe try a different yoga class. But is there a particular yoga practice that you are finding maybe more appealing than others, or maybe more appealing at the moment? Has it evolved for you? Like from when you started in 2010, was there a particular practice you felt more compelled to, and you have a different practice now?
Definitely. It's a good question. My yoga practice has evolved a lot. It started mainly after the initial introduction of understanding the base poses, it evolved into being very interested in power vinyasa yoga. And then I was injured and I had to take a step back and be more gentle with my body. And so there are so many different types and forms and names that people put on yoga. Most of those practices are based in a very similar tradition. Many of the poses are the same. They're just taught in different ways or at different speeds. my personal yoga practice has evolved depending on what I need at a certain time. And that's what I suggest for everyone is try out different classes, try out different teachers, and try out different styles. There's so many options out there.
I can't remember the name, but there's a yoga, my friend calls it lazy yoga because it's very therapeutic. It's very like you're in poses for a long time. Do you know what that one's called?
Yes. So
what's that one called?
There's quite a few ones that you could coin as lazy yoga. One would be yin yoga, which you're holding postures for a long amount of time. You're typically always laying down on the floor in some type of position and holding the postures from 5 to 10 minutes. I personally actually find that practice very challenging to hold one posture, even if it is a restorative posture, for several minutes. There's also restorative yoga where you don't have to hold it as long, but you're moving through gentle poses and you have bolsters and pillows and blankets helping prop you up. And then
that's the one I've done.
Yeah, restorative
I love
yoga.
that one.
And then there's also, I was thinking about this last night as preparing, and one that you actually don't see that much here in Santa Cruz, but there's yoga nidra, which is sleeping yoga. And it's actually no asana, it's no posture. You're laying down on your back or in any way that you feel most comfortable lying down. And the teacher guides you through a meditation practice, and it's a body scan followed by some directives for your meditation. So it's a way to deeply awake kind of sleep where you're tuning into your body in stillness.
What's that one called again?
Yoga Nidra.
And so that I've never heard of that. That sounds exactly what I would love to do.
Yeah.
But you haven't seen it here in Santa Cruz then?
I haven't seen it advertised as just Yoga Nidra. It's interesting, actually. I came here from D.C., Washington, D.C., and you can pretty much find a Yoga Nidra class in every studio, more or less. A lot of times here you find teachers tacking it on to the end of a yoga class. So like an extended shavasana, final rest, that's more than just 5 or 10 minutes. Instead, it's maybe 15 or 20 minutes with a long guided meditation. And that would also be considered yoga nidra.
My friend has a t-shirt that says, I've never met a shavasana that I didn't love. That is probably my favorite pose as well.
Yeah.
There's something about the way you can just sort of release and decompress and just standing still, on your back. It's just incredibly therapeutic.
Definitely. And that's how I would say most people feel, but also when we were being trained to become yoga teachers, and you hear this often, that for some people, Shavasana is the hardest pose of the class. So that's the part of yoga that I love, and being aware that not every student is having the same experience at the same time, and adjusting my teaching to try to help and guide each student to get what they need out of the practice, but still feel comfortable and safe through the entire process.
So what would you tell someone who's maybe new to yoga, who is perhaps intimidated by the pictures they've seen in magazines about the practice? I mean, I know when I was first trying to think about yoga as a practice for myself, that the pictures for me in the yoga magazines are quite intimidating. And I thought, I will never be able to do these poses. What kind of words of advice would you give for someone who might be intimidated by that kind of imagery?
Well, the first thing I want to say, and I think it's probably said fairly often by a lot of yoga teachers, is that yoga is not for flexible people. People come to yoga to become more flexible, both physically and mentally. A lot of people come to yoga because they want to get in shape, they want to have a more flexible body. But over time, we realize, hopefully, that yoga is more of a practice of the body, and it's a practice of the mind, and learning how to adjust your breath and your awareness so that you can come deeper into these poses. And eventually that might result in flexibility. It might not. We all have different bodies and we're all built differently. So some people may be able to come into the splits immediately because of the way their body's built, and for somebody else it may take them years, and for somebody else they may just never be able to get there just because of the way your body's built. Another thing I would tell to people who are intimidated by yoga is to, kind of what we were talking about before, find a style that works for you. So coming back to my experience in Costa Rica and me just sitting there and watching these people and thinking this is a crazy practice of acrobatics. Well, there is acrobatic yoga and there's also sleeping yoga. So there is everything in the spectrum, and try different styles until you can find the right style and the right teacher that's for you, because all teachers have different different ways of approaching their class and messaging, and some chant, some sing, some don't use music, some listen to Justin Timberlake. It's such a range. So you can dabble around until you find what's the best fit for you, and always take a friend with you. I think that helps make it a lot less intimidating.
I've never associated Justin Timberlake with any kind of yoga practice, so that is news to me. But I think the point about teachers is really critical, because I feel like I have become more serious in my practice because I found a teacher that's working for me. And it took me a long time to finally find the teachers that work for me. But I think there is something about not giving up the search, because I'm like, I know there's something here that I just need to find the right fit.
Definitely. I think the teacher is very important. And I think over time, the practitioner, the student, we become our own best teacher. And that's something that's taken me a very long time to realize as well. It's important to practice with a regular teacher who knows who you are, where you are, your injuries, your body, and continue to practice with them. But it's also good to practice with yourself and not have somebody telling you something, but instead listening to yourself and what you best need. And at that point is when you could go to almost any class and enjoy it, because you know what you need and you can adjust and tweak whatever the teacher's telling you to what best fits in your body without going off the ranch, as one of my yoga teachers actually used to say, like going, doing a handstand while everyone else is laying down or something like that, but adjusting the practice to best fit you in the moment.
And that, I think, will address the intimidation issue, because you are simply approaching the practice about where you're at and not necessarily the person next to you or the one who is doing these crazy acrobatic moves.
Yes.
You're listening to Jackie Powell, a certified yoga instructor based here in Santa Cruz. So in just a relatively short time, really, because you said you started practicing in 2010, you've become quite passionate about the practice. What is driving this passion, and what yoga, personally, the practice is doing for you, maybe emotionally or spiritually or and even physically?
We all face struggles. We face struggles on a daily and hourly basis, and then in bigger parts of our lives that are reoccurring. And so what drew me to yoga initially and what it helped me get through were some stressful moments in Guatemala. I had a car stolen, feelings of insecurity, going through difficult relationships, moments of depression. And these are things that we all face in different points of our life. But the practice of yoga, of coming to my breath, being more connected with myself, shutting out a little bit of the outside world and listening to who I really am inside, and being my own teacher and my own guide is what yoga has given me. It has given me a place to heal emotionally and also physically, because I have been injured before physically, a torn hamstring, and you think it's the end of the world, but actually... And so many people told me this, and I didn't believe them then. And I know if you're injured right now, you probably don't agree. But if you're practicing yoga with an injury, it's amazing how much awareness you can bring to your injury and help heal it faster and in a healthier way.
And so then, did it accelerate the healing process, you think? Or is it just about being more conscious about your body?
Through that injury, I began realizing how my body was unbalanced. I was using more of one side of my body than the other. So now I focus on that a lot in my personal practice and especially strengthening that side that was injured. It was injured because it wasn't as strong as the other side. And I also learned through the injury that movement helps, heat helps. It hurts it more to not do anything than to continue to move. And that can be in yoga or it could be in another physical activity. But I do think with injury, you need to continually move and retrain your muscles or whatever has been injured to heal.
And so one of the things that people will say about yoga classes are comment on the cost of them, that they're quite expensive and that this can in fact be limiting in terms of, your ability to take these classes on a regular basis or consistent basis. So what would you say about, or what kind of commentary would you offer about the expense of yoga classes and how this may in fact be limiting people's access to it, in particular because of your commitment to making yoga more accessible?
So, the cost of yoga is a highly debated and talked about issue, I believe, especially here in Santa Cruz. There's a lot of yoga studios. It's small business here is hard to maintain, including yoga studios. So, the price here in Santa Cruz for yoga studios is very high for some families and some individuals. I found the situation when I moved from DC versus Santa Cruz is very different, just based on number of people and different types of opportunities. So pricing is hard. And we also need to be, we need to be valued as yoga teachers. We can't teach all of our classes for free. So there's something that has to give in the situation. And I've taught for studios before, and I actually teach for one now, that they have options of donation-based classes. They have sliding scale offerings. That's not the case of all studios, but you can look for those opportunities if you're looking to practice yoga at a more reduced and affordable rate. But if you do have the resources, consider that small business needs to be supported and the yoga teachers need to be supported as well. So for that reason, I enjoy teaching. I teach currently in Watsonville, and they have one of the lowest drop-in rates around. It's $10 for a 1-hour class and $12 for an hour and 15-minute class. They also have sliding scale classes. They have donation-based classes, and they even have free classes for farm workers. So I enjoy teaching at places that is able to adjust their model for their clientele as well. And we have to remember that there are a lot of free yoga classes in the community. You just have to know where to look for them. One that I'm actually hoping to be a part of soon is at the MA. They have a series called Shake the Square, where they bring in different wellness practitioners, mainly yoga, but also meditation. I'm not sure what else they might bring in the future, but those are free and donation-based classes. There's also classes on the beach that you can find. And then there's always videos online, and I actually recently published 3 online videos. They're free. They're all level classes. They range from 12 to about 16 minutes. One is more challenging, one's more restorative, and one's kind of a warm-up video. So you can piece them together any way you like or just do one.
So how can people find those YouTube yoga classes?
So my YouTube yoga classes, I believe it's youtube.com/Jackie Sue Powell 1. But either way, you can just Google Jackie Sue Powell Yoga YouTube, and I'm sure it will come up immediately. They will also be on my website very soon, JackieSuePowell.com. I'm also on Facebook. They're on Facebook already published there. Jackie Sue Powell Yoga on Facebook.
That's great. So then if people are even curious about it or apprehensive, they can at least even be exposed to your free yoga classes online and sort of determine what works for them in that way.
Right. That's another point I wanted to bring up earlier is if you're intimidated by yoga, much like I did when I was first starting this practice, I was doing videos at home and moving at my own pace and then eventually moving into the class setting. So either based for pricing or because of intimidation, online videos are a great option.
So my next question to you, Jackie, is talking about this link between yoga and social justice, which I know is another commitment you have. How do you understand this interrelationship?
So the idea of yoga and social justice first came to my attention mainly in my first yoga teacher training in Washington, D.C. And in D.C., there's a very large population of activists, given the nature of the city, and that was true also in my teacher training group. So because of that, the woman who organized our teacher training, she invited in a local teacher, activist, and studio owner who has made it her journey to connect yoga with social justice issues in DC. So it was through that afternoon with that teacher and doing some brainstorming and reflecting that it clicked for me that yoga doesn't need to just be in a yoga studio and it doesn't need to just be in a gym, but yoga can be for everyone and it should be everywhere. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. And part of my job is to make those connections. So it got me very excited because I've worked in all sorts of communities and places before, and I enjoy interacting with all sorts of people. So it was through the interaction with that teacher that I started my brain started churning on different communities outside of your typical yoga studio that I could interact with. So I actually started a relationship with a local nonprofit hospital that serves mainly a Hispanic population in Washington, D.C., and I offered yoga to their clientele once a week. I've also taught in facilities that help youth who are transitioning out of the system. I've taught bilingual family yoga classes that were supported by a grant, so the families didn't have to pay anything. And those connections were through both my personal connections and also through yoga studios in Washington, D.C. that really care about these issues as well. So for me, the question of social justice and yoga is about access and the fact that this is a practice that brings us more inner peace, brings us more sense of self, connects us both with ourselves and with each other. And all of the benefits that we feel in yoga should be for everyone. So I really enjoy trying to make that part of my mission as well. And here in Santa Cruz, I teach in Watsonville. There's yoga for farm worker classes. I don't teach that class, but I love teaching in a space that promotes those types of classes. Also yoga for cancer classes in the same space, bilingual classes. I teach chair yoga now over the hill in San Jose. I teach in adult day centers over there, so adults who have Alzheimer's, cancer, partially paralyzed, people you think that maybe they can't do yoga, but they can because yoga is very adaptive. So I've been able to adapt it to the chair to bring it to a wider audience. There's also another movement here in Santa Cruz that I'm not part of right now, but I was talking about this interview to a friend and she's on the board and I would love to get in touch with them. That's called the Yoga for All movement here in Santa Cruz. And they not only offer a lot of free and community classes, donation-based, but they also go to the local prison and teach there, and they connect the teachers with the facility. So there's a lot of stuff going on. We just kind of have to look for it. And I think definitely here in Santa Cruz, there's a lot of awareness about this as well. So a lot is happening. You might just not be hearing about it.
So it's important to kind of be on the alert and get into those networks if you can. You know, what I love about that philosophy, of course, especially when we're talking about activists and social justice activists in particular, is the first thing I think too many activists do is let go of their bodies and taking care of them because there's so much to be done. And, you know, we're kind of in this hectic political moment where to actually prioritize one's body in whatever resistance efforts are being done is really critical. But I feel like, you know, we kind of get so caught up in everything that has to get done. We're not eating well, we're not exercising, and we're sort of almost injuring our bodies because we're feeling like we can't take any time for ourselves.
From activists to a single mom just trying to get through her day, it's the practice of yoga, of slowing down, connecting with your breath, reflecting, and listening is so important to maintain some sanity.
That's right, to maintain some sanity. You're listening to Jackie Powell, a certified yoga instructor based here in Santa Cruz. So I know from talking to you and from your website, you've been able to teach yoga in all kinds of communities around the world. Why don't we talk a little bit about how you came to teach yoga, for instance, in Palestine? That really caught my interest.
Thank you. Yes, this is one of my huge passions. I took off for 6 months on a little mini sabbatical and traveled through Europe. And in my travels, I was able to create free community yoga in park events. So this predates Palestine a bit, but it was there that I was like, okay, I can really actually go somewhere that I don't know anyone and create events around yoga and people will show up. So I did that in Spain and France, in Switzerland. One of my favorite stories is in the Retiro Park in Madrid. I advertised on couch surfing, and one of those classes, about 15 people from maybe about 10 different countries showed up. And they're all travelers or they were locals. It was a combination. So many languages. It was beautiful. And so that gave me the confidence that when I first ended up in Tel Aviv, and the next day after I arrived, there were sirens and missiles, and there was a military operation against Gaza while I was there. I had no idea what I was experiencing. It was a very tense situation. From Tel Aviv, I eventually made my way to the West Bank, and everything was kind of just shut down because of the situation happening in Gaza. So I went to the local community center. I just walked in because this is what I would do here. I walked in, I said, I'm a yoga teacher and I would love to offer free yoga classes to anyone who wants to show up. So I taught there twice a week for about a month, and lots of different people came in, and it evolved over time. I learned so much from that experience and teaching in that, especially in that culture that I had never been a part of before. And I can maybe talk about that a little bit later too. And from there, I met people, and somebody invited me to teach a group of 50 teenagers, a mixture of Palestinian and some European teenagers who were there for a camp. And so I showed up at this big gym and tried to teach, and that was my first time teaching teenagers. I had no idea what I was doing, but in retrospect, we have to go through these uncomfortable experiences to learn. So I learned a lot. One woman really loved me and the yoga practice that she was experiencing. So she invited me to her village several hours away, and we got out some prayer mats and hiked into an olive grove and tried to practice yoga at sunset. And I was like, can we really do yoga and prayer mats? And they said that we could. So it was quite an experience. They gave me so much from those experiences, and I hope that, and I know that I was able to give them a sense of peace for even if it's just for a little while in that shavasana. And so that was a really special time for me.
So that's kind of incredible. You just walked into the community center and said, I've got this amazing offer for you. And people appeared.
Yes, people appeared. It transitioned. It came and went. The first class was the biggest one, and there were men and women. And for me, that's nothing special. But then I realized that the Muslim women there felt uncomfortable. And so then no men came back after that. It was an interesting experience. For sure.
Well, really amazing that you did that. Now, were you staying in the West Bank then, or at this time?
Yes, I stayed in Ramallah. It was in Ramallah.
You were saying something about how an experience you had there you might want to share later. So why don't you share us now what you were alluding to?
Right. Well, so from my experiences there, I learned a lot about being a teacher. So I was traveling directly after receiving my first yoga teacher training certificate. So I was still very new to teaching, and so kind of jumping in, teaching people all over Europe and then in Palestine, it was a big learning curve for me. One of the other experiences I had teaching at the community center in Ramallah in the West Bank was one of my friends who was coming every week. We were about to start class, and she said, Jackie, can you wait a minute? I need to fix my hair. And she's wearing hijab, so I don't know what's under her hijab, but she tells me later that she had little clips in her hair that before she was unable to enjoy anything laying down on her back because the clips were digging into her scalp. So she realized she needed to fix her hair before the class, but it's something I would never even think about because if my hair is bothering me, I fix it. But she has to go to the bathroom and take off her hijab and fix it and then put it back on. So everything I learned there and the people I met, and they were just so wonderful and welcoming. And I grew a lot as a yoga teacher, just kind of throwing myself into those situations.
Right. It sounds like you also just sort of grew as a person, right? Because I think being in those uncomfortable, unfamiliar situations we sort of can rise to the occasion or we can sink. And so it sounds like you did something pretty special there in that space.
Thank you.
You're listening to Jackie Powell, a certified yoga instructor based here in Santa Cruz, someone who's very passionate about yoga and has had the good fortune of being able to teach yoga all around the world. Could you talk a little bit more about the classes that you're teaching now in the area and how people can learn more about your teaching philosophies and some of your practice in general?
Thank you. So I teach locally at Watsonville Yoga Studios. I teach a kids yoga class at 4 o'clock on Wednesdays. It's for kids between the ages of 3 and 10 primarily. And then following that, also on Wednesdays at 5:30 in Watsonville, I teach a strong vinyasa flow class. So that class is best suited for people who have done probably at least 5 yoga classes and feeling pretty healthy in their body. But again, the Watsonville studio has classes for all levels, all abilities, and both in English and in Spanish, and their prices are very reasonable. So come see me in Watsonville if you're in the area on Wednesday evenings. I'm also available for private classes, either individual private classes or group classes. I love getting out into the community. So if anybody's listening to this and they have a brewery or a wine tasting room and you want to couple an event, that is my kind of jam. So I would love any opportunities like that. And then I also have a workshop coming up in Watsonville at their studio. It's called Watsonville Yoga, Dance, and Healing Arts. It's a healthy spine workshop where I'll be collaborating with a local chiropractor. She will be leading a discussion first on proper posture, relieving tension in the spine. And then following that, I will lead a 1-hour chair yoga class that focuses on posture, core strengthening, twists to relieve tension in the spine. And so you'll definitely leave with a lot of new knowledge about your back and strengthening and staying more upright. I'm really excited about that opportunity. So that's at the end of September. September the 30th is a Saturday in the afternoon from 2 to 4:30. And you can learn more about that at watsonville.yoga/events-1 is the website. And
why don't we give them your website?
My website, of course. Thank you for reminding me. My website is JackieSuePowell.com. You can find most of my information there or on Facebook, Jackie Sue Powell Yoga.
So that's JackieSuePowell.com, JACKIE, Sue, SUE, Powell, POWELL.com. Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for coming on and being with us for the last hour on Transformation Highway. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this.